I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And we will fight for it. Good evening. Good evening. Remember, we're Americans. Stand up. Well, the date today is 9th December, 1993, one day closer to victory here in the occupied states. Brought to you not from Radio Free America, but the Little Brother Information Network. Big Brother is watching. Little Brother has a very big mouth. In the days that have passed since our last taping, and since our original tape, American Peril, many, many things have happened. Most of what was originally put into American Peril, the tape, has already come to pass or is in motion at this time. I'd like to read this one piece, which is very important and key to the heart of this particular presentation. Before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed, as they are in almost every kingdom of Europe. The supreme power in America cannot enforce unjust laws by the sword because the whole body of the people are armed and constitute a force superior to any bands of regular troops or military formations. Noah Webster, 1787. And as you all know, since this is the 9th, many laws have come into power, and many shortly will come into power that will grossly violate the Constitution and Bill of Rights of the United States of America. We stand in perhaps the darkest time in the history of this nation, short of the original revolution itself. The usurpation of power on the part of the regime, not a government, but the regime that is in place at this time, is about to unfold into a very evil flower. The product of this mechanism is not something that was contrived over a few weeks, neither a few months nor a few years, but is a long-term plan that has been in the making for decades, half-centuries, and in fact for the most part of this century. It is the ambition of our enemy, and in fact it is their sworn oath to destroy the Constitution and the Bill of Rights of the United States. We are unlike any power on the planet. In fact, we are unlike any power that has existed on this planet so far. We were based upon the common law, and in fact should still be, which are those laws granted to us by God through the Bible. We are a nation that was based upon Christianity, and all those things that are required of us, both as good citizens and as Christians, still hold true today, though many Christians are not following through on their responsibility and obligations. We're a nation with opportunity. We have had great strength, great wealth, great power, sometimes improperly wielded, but still are the best hope for the planet. Does that mean that we shall endure? No. For we have failed, perhaps, in many ways, and if we are not careful, we are at that boiling point or nexus in time in which all shall face to destroy this nation now, for they can see the opportunity. There are convolutions involved from many sides. The threat is very diverse. It is not simply from one entity, but many entities collected to become one foe against us. The United States of America has always stood alone. Do not be confused by any people who might say, my goodness, how can we stand up to this threat? I mean, they're totally powerful. They have the most sophisticated military. They have vast amounts of resources in terms of dollar and physical assets. Absolutely true. But that situation has not changed throughout the entire history of this nation. For we have always faced the monarchies and the kingdoms of this globe. We face them once again. It is now the turn of this generation to decide whether or not it has the intestinal fortitude to hang on to its freedom and pass that shining beacon on to the next generation. It's not 3 years down the road. It's not 5 years down the road. It's not 10 years down the road. It's now. The enemy that we face realizes that even as they are grasping for the final laurel, it's slipping out of their fingers. We've seen this just in the last 2 to 3 weeks. We've talked to people all over the country. I am in awe. I'm impressed. I'm not a pessimist. I'm an optimist, and absolutely so. But I'm also a realist. We understand the capabilities of the enemy. The Founding Fathers understood it when they faced it, pledging their lives, their fortunes, their futures. We will have to do the same thing. I've already done so. Somebody asked me the other day something that was rather fascinating, is, well, why do you present yourself the way you do and you're so dramatic, etc.? Because our Founding Fathers presented themselves that way, unashamed, unabashed, and because they did not hide in the shadows, they stood in the light. Americans have sat in the shadows long enough. I saw a very interesting article 3 weeks ago that is very pertinent to this. The title of the article is "America is a Population of Cowards and Shirkers." Yes, some of us are. Yes, we have shirked our responsibilities and our obligations. We have been placated into this, though. We have been wheedled into this, talked in by the beguiling snake. Everything is okay. All I want to do is take you to lunch, Mowgli. Okay? And because of this, we are now on the brink of a catastrophe that need not exist, that should not exist. Example, if the Christian population of this nation will not lead, and in fact has a moral obligation to do so, who will? And what have we gotten in place of that? Take a look at the regime in power now. As the old saying goes, watchman, you have been asleep on the wall, and the enemy is in the gate. He has come in by many directions. He is fortified by our ignorance, by our lack of response, and by our willingness to concede. I do not have the word compromise in my vocabulary and have not had it for many years. Where matters of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are concerned, I compromise not. With regard to my beliefs, with regard to my strengths, I say this: these knees bend for no man in this country or abroad. I have no king, I have no monarch, I have no emperor. And they will not bow to any but one being, and that is God himself. For he is the true king. Now some people say, oh, tone that down. Let me read one quote that's very important here, because you should best understand the Founding Fathers, and most of which has been taken out of our history books for a reason. Because with no faith, there is no strength. Our enemy has no faith. Our enemy is constantly quaking at the thought that we are nipping at his heels in some way. He will never be secure even were he to win. He will fight amongst himself. They shall backbite until they have consumed themselves. As the old saying goes, they eat their young. You've been given a great gift. Now I also say this: I personally believe that you are going to have to face your creators in the future. Your creator, more important than anything else, is going to ask you one thing. You were given this beacon. You were given the opportunity. Did you do everything in your power to ensure that this nation was secure? Because it is an obligation and a responsibility of free men, granted by God, not by the state, not granted by the Constitution or the Bill of Rights. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights were a chain upon the beast called government to protect all of us from that monster. Not the other way around, not to protect the government from the people. For if properly taught, and if properly guided by that beacon, the government need not fear us at all. On the other hand, what does this regime think of its people right now that it must disarm us as quickly as possible? And ask yourself this cold question. If they get what they want, which is this one world government, there will be no check or balance at all. And one thing that George Washington, Patrick Henry, Benjamin Franklin said uncategorically: trust no government. Trust no government at all. Trust no man with that much power. And yet we're being told by this regime right now that we are to hand our coercive force, our liberty teeth, to a group of people who are alien to this nation, who, if they have their way, will reign supreme as if they were kings on earth over all the peoples of this planet. Now, even in our Constitution, it discusses a little thing called titles of nobility and the fact that they are illegal for a reason. We are individual sovereigns inside the Republic of Michigan, which is where I stand now, in these United States of America. I take my sovereignty very seriously. I take my birthright very seriously, and so should you all. It is the mistake that is made by virtually every citizen at this time talking about compromise. If you make yourself a slave, do not be surprised if the government could care less of your opinion. Remember one very important quote again: government big enough to supply everything you need is big enough to take everything that you have. Thomas Jefferson. Was he wrong? No. And we are talking about a government that is so vast it will be totally isolated from the people. A government, a regime so vast that there'll be no voice heard of any individual again. As Orwell said, a boot on the face of humanity forever. So do we fight it? Well, heck yes we do. Do we stand alone? We have always stood alone, as I have said earlier. Does that mean that we will not win? I will say this also: we have no choice but to win. For as originally stood with this flag, "Don't tread on me," was another very powerful statement: victory or death. You stand with your backs to the wall. All other nations have fallen already, both economically and perhaps militarily, most assuredly socially. And you are the last vestige of hope for this planet. If you do not stand now, there will not be an opportunity later. For those of you who would say, "Oh, I would wish this, oh, I wish I could retire, I wish this would happen down the road, and perhaps if I'm lucky I'll die and it'll happen to somebody else," that is a pretty pitiful statement for you people. To wish it upon your children, who are less prepared than you are to fight this beast. We don't get another shot. And the other side knows this too, but they are scared. I have seen across the United States, just in the last several months that I have dealt with this problem, tens of thousands of people. Every day I've been on the road somewhere in the last 3 weeks, meeting with people all through the Midwest, meeting with people even to our north. And what I see is this: a lot of gray-haired people, a lot of very young people, a lot of people in between, but they're all saying one thing: we cannot let this happen. We had best do something now, for we will not be given another chance. They're not sure what's happening completely, but back here in that little lumber yard, as I call it, where all little 2x4s and 2x2s are stuck, and that's what you call our brain basket here, there's a little fire started back here because the media has become arrogant. Our enemy has become greedy, avarice, and bold. And thank you, Lord, he has not changed, and he hasn't. Because of that, more and more on a daily basis, they will admit overtly to what we have been talking about time and time again. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily giving us all the picture, but they feel now that if they do not strike quickly, if they do not use that swift sword, that they will not be given another chance. Are we knocking them out of their cycle? Are we perhaps creating a situation that will force them to respond? Yes. Yes. We have no choice. There's a basic rule to any kind of warfare: geopolitical, social, economical, whatever. You don't let the enemy pick the time. I will do everything in my power. I will stand here, and I verily will say that I am risking my life now, and there is no doubt in my mind. If the enemy wins, everything that I say tonight, everything that I have said for the many months that we've been doing this, will be held against me. I also know this: I will, if need be, fight. I will, if need be, though I prefer not to, die for this cause, because it is better to die a free man than live with some of the filth that I've seen as slaves. And I will not suffer that. I will hand my weapons off to my children, and they shall continue the cause when I have fallen. And if they perish as free citizens, as free sovereigns, as free people, but certainly not as slaves, with chains around their neck, begging for the option to marry, to own a pitiful possession of some type, to be but a ghost or a frail image of what we have been. No. The time now is to stand. It is to stand up and then by no stretch of the imagination hide in the shadows. Some will need to, perhaps, for we have many different warriors. But as for myself, I've already chosen a path alien to my teaching. All of you are going to have to make that same decision now. Freedom or slavery. The one is the walking dead. The other, a path of eternal life, the likes of which in your heart will burn forever. They can't take it from you. They can't take it from your children if they're properly taught. And it is amazing to me that for all the rhetoric, the biggest concern is the restriction, is the destruction, is the flattening, the leveling of our independence. If we are to believe all the rhetoric that we've seen so far, people, we're going to live in one big, warm, fuzzy planet where everybody has no borders. Well, if everybody has no borders and it's one big, fuzzy, warm planet, why do we need that national ID card? Why do we need to register everybody if we're going to be free and floating off into some warm, fuzzy ither in the future here in which we can all bandy about half naked and play in the man-made Garden of Eden? If that's the case, no ID cards are necessary, no numbers, no control. So you have to then ask yourself, what is the true motive and nature of the beast, of this creature? I will not give them the honor of calling them human beings, for I think that many of them are very alien to what we would consider human now. I look at their eyes. Especially, I look at their eyes. And if you look at, you will see the eyes of a Heinrich Himmler. You will see the eyes of a Heydrich, the butcher of Prague, of a Molotov, the executioner of 60 million Russians at one time or another, or the eyes of any number of butchers, the likes of which this planet has seen in the past, and here in the United States we have always put a leash upon. Gentlemen and ladies, it is time to put a leash upon this beast once again. We have no choice. Whenever I start to think of these issues, the first thing that I've heard a lot of people, especially when I've spoken publicly about this, aren't you afraid? Shouldn't you be terrified, Mark? Well, at one time I would have an inkling of fear, perhaps, but I've lost all of that. I'll tell you why right now. The Founding Fathers faced the same issue again. And as Patrick Henry said, I have but one lamp by which my feet are guided, and that is a lamp of experience. I know of no way of judging the future but by the past. Let us not, I beseech you, deceive ourselves longer. We have done everything that could be done to avert the storm which is now coming on. If we wish to be free, we must fight. I repeat, we must fight. An appeal to arms and God is all that is left to us. All that is left. This is a piece from his original call to arms. The times were the same as we see now. The king, or the regime, the government that existed, had called upon its people and taken great treasure from them in excess. It had oppressed and trodden upon the people. It had shot and in fact been exonerated for actions against the people. Now there are many rewritings of history, but the fact of the matter is this. To paraphrase our enemy's use of the terms, we had reached the Malthusian limit of politics. That point at which the resources that were available to us far exceeded those which we were willing to give. And so at that given point, a choice was made. A gamble, a great risk. Bloody footprints in the snow are still the most important image that I think of. 2 years of the worst fighting that a military soldier could imagine. No resources, no supply, no help from the rear. Acquiring your material and your war effort from not your side, but the other side. If you attack and win, you get to keep what he's left on the battlefield. If you lose utterly. And so, victory determined the war effort, one battle at a time. Are we in any different position today? In most cases, I would say yes, we are. Through systematic eradication of manufacturing in the United States, we are almost at the lowest ebb in production that we could possibly imagine with regards to essential material inside the United States. Food production is at the lowest conceivable level we have seen in the history of this nation. The last Department of Agriculture figures put us at 6 days food reserves inside the United States. That is an unheard of level that is criminal in nature. What it means is that somebody has systematically, through their planning, created deficiency with a nation that in 1952 through 55 and even later could produce enough food to feed the planet 5 times over with a marked less production capability and granted a population smaller, but they were equal. Our capacity to produce food has increased, and yet we have reduced our output. Any industry that would do that perhaps deserves to go out of business, unless it's been planned and there was coercive action involved designed to create a threat. Our enemy's concepts have to do with the Hegelian principle of thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Create the problem, demonstrate the problem, give you the solution. The solution is something you would not have considered acceptable. But with the first 2 phases, we can convince you of anything. Guns, drugs, drugs, guns. You don't need those weapons. Look at that problem. Hand them over. Now, I will say this. As I was discussing earlier, our liberty teeth are many. But in the last 2 weeks, the tens and hundreds of millions of rounds of ammunition that have transferred to the hands of the people have been dispersed so well that they will never find them all and not even come close. And were they to attempt to take them, it would be the last pitiful act of this regime. And I will say this, they will try. They are on a path of destruction that they cannot avoid. They cannot wait any longer. They cannot in any way, shape, or form attempt to use their political machine at the original speed. If they give us 2 years with the efforts that we've had with patriots across the nation, our army will quintuple, sextuple, tentuple. It is vast, and it is growing stronger by the day. To give you an example of production output from wholesale resources to the general population, Southern Ohio Gun of Ohio this last Monday sold 30,000 cases of .30 caliber Russian ammunition, 46,000 cases of another variant on .30 caliber Russian ammunition. Of the one type, 33 million rounds were sold in 1.5 days. Of the other type, 46 million rounds of ammunition sold. And that's not even all calibers accounted for. That's not all ammunition accounted for, and that is only one wholesaler in the United States. Was it purchased by large companies coming in and grabbing all of it in one bundle? Could it have been a government purchase to try and get rid of the arms? No. It was Grandma and Grandpa, Mom and Pop, Dad and Sis showing up with the pickup trucks, the station wagons, and the local Subaru, and carrying the arms away in a constant flow, hour after hour, minute after minute, time and again. They'll never find it all. The amount of war material that is now in the hands of the Patriot Movement is more than sufficient to deal with the secret police threat. And that threat is great. It will force our aggressor to escalate to the next level, which is to truly show his face and implement foreign forces on a much, much larger scale. You are dealing with internationalists. You are not dealing with Americans. So anybody who would think that they will not employ foreign forces must understand an old and, shall we say, correct adage here that fits. We have already sent foreign forces, by the way, United Nations forces, to Somalia, Macedonia, Cambodia, Peru, and places unknown, because how would we know? You're not in the know. The American people are the big threat right now, so we don't inform the American people. You are the last in the link, but the first to pay. But remember this. When you send American forces outside the United States, and they're used on somebody else, what's good for the goose is good for the goosey. You've signed a contract. And at a given point, they are going to obligate you to become part of the game. The New World Order cannot suffer its slaves to be armed. And we talked about this 2 years ago. Canada, or the Canadian SSD, Soviet Socialist Democracy, unfortunately, already has these types of laws. They're already in place. They already have everything that they need stacked. Now with the NAFTA treaty, which of course is just going into power, I asked this question before, and many other people did too. Mexico and Canada have gun laws that make America's seem very frail by comparison, and in fact they are. In the Canadian SSD, what we have is one step away from communist Russia or Nazi Germany. Make no illusion about it. To our south, in the Mexican regime, well, boys and girls, let us ask ourselves what their national police force is like when we call them the Federales. You don't take a picture of the Federales. If you do, they take your camera. If you're lucky, they don't take your life, depending on how they feel. If you're an internal citizen of Mexico, your life isn't worth squat. Touch a Federale, and that's the same as assaulting a police officer, a felonious charge. The officer can respond with lethal force. That's the kind of government that these people would like to see imposed upon us. For they're not going to lighten up in Mexico, and they certainly won't lighten up in Canada. So what prevailed with NAFTA? Well, NAFTA was signed long before it was actually ratified by the House and the Senate. And in it were a series of charters and body agreements which allowed for the laws, or the more oppressive laws of those states, to become the laws of the United States. And of course, most of them were open-ended laws too. Gentlemen and ladies, have you ever bought a car that's not painted and let the company paint it for you, deciding what color you'll get as long as it's black? Yeah. It is amazing how lackadaisical and how, shall we say, silent our people have become considering such important matters. Well, it is no accident that the crime bill, a la the Brady bill, would pass at the same time that the NAFTA did. Because many of those congressmen and senators, many of our representatives who were involved with this, knew full well that NAFTA was unconstitutional in many, many different ways. But specifically with regard to this, the New World Order must be handed our arms and our heads as quickly as possible. And they've done just that. Under the cover of darkness, a very interesting parallel, by the way, if you will notice, every time that a major action has taken place, specifically with legislation that has been against the American Constitution, it has been under the cover of darkness in the 11th hour or later. Now there is great symbolism to this. For traditionally under the common law, no man nor law was either allowed to be tried or passed in the hours of darkness, but had to be done in the light of day. Why? I will remind you, when was Jesus tried? At night. And was that in violation of the law? Yes, it was. There is great symbolism in the actions of our enemy. For you it may not seem important, because you've been conditioned not to think about these things. Because in their eyes, we are cattle, we are sheep, we are animals. to be herded, bred, and used at their discretion. And in fact, at the governor's conference, this very thing came up in the last couple of years. You are property. You are chattel. You are a resource to be traded and bartered among states, disposed of if need be. Think about that. One thing that was brought up by a friend of mine here is the fact that all of your birth certificates are with what department? The Department of Commerce? Well, why would your birth certificates be registered with the Department of Commerce? Because you are property in their eyes. And if you cannot foreclose because there's nothing else worth anything with the debts that have been accumulated and with what you owe as a people, then last but not least, you take the oldest of properties on this planet, the people themselves. But even though it is very dark, there's one other thing to remember. I've said it 100 times, but I will say it again. The tighter they squeeze, the greater the number of people slip through their fingers. And I have seen so many. The tighter they squeeze, the greater the realization that we must fight. I consider this, yes, a call to arms. Patrick Henry had to lay his head on the block. It's about time we Americans start doing the same thing. We have an absolute need. Time is short. Let me remind you something about simple economics. If you had acted as a free citizen 3 weeks ago, it would cost you 1/3 as much for the arms that you need. It would have cost you 1/2 as much for the ammunition that you need, if you can find it. It would cost you less for virtually everything. And rule number 1, gentlemen and ladies, is this. If you did not buy it, if you did not acquire it when it was cheaper, something has to be wrong with the common sense department, because what you are battling here is a war for free resources. Every dollar that you have to waste on greater expense means that you have fewer dollars to spend over here on other items that are essential, because eventually these will all dry up. Weapons, medical supplies, food. As each becomes priority, it is essential that they be accumulated. It is amazing to me that throughout the entire history of this nation, we have been a nation of gatherers. Anybody who lived through the Great Depression of the United States is not ignorant in any way, shape, or form of the catastrophe that prevailed, and that is small by comparison to what we are going to see now. Even at that time, our food reserves exceeded demand. We simply didn't have the cash capital to purchase it. Farmers dumped their milk in the roads. Farmers burned their crops in the fields. And eventually, everybody had to do for themselves and create another sub-economy. We were supposed to buckle then, and we failed because the nation is still too resilient. And so, the threat, the aggressor, has now gone the next step and is taking us to the highest possible ledge before he drops us into the deepest possible hole. And he's going to do just that. He is setting us up for a very big fall. And the final game. On C-SPAN over the last 3 days, there have been several comments by individuals. We like to call it CFR-SPAN nowadays, since we might as well. It's owned by them, just about. One of the comments was their need to follow up with an end game scenario as quickly as possible. They said this flat out and publicly on CFR-SPAN, a la C-SPAN. An end game plan? Well, we didn't know that there was any end game involvement here. I thought this was the New World Order where we get to roll off into that fluffy horizon with little crimson skyline and the little angels speaking and everything. This is rather strange. That implies that there's going to be a lopping of heads or a cutting off of something. That we've been at war in some ways. Well, that's strange because they've been spouting peace flowers and vegetables, guys, remember? Well, obviously then, we have been using the same dictionary the other side has been using, have we? That becomes a very tragic situation. Remember that. Al Gore's comment, we are going to reorganize government. Well, when you think reorganize, you think shuffle a few papers. When they say reorganize, they mean confiscation of properties or the transfer of resources because you have a debt. And it's reorganization as in shall we say, bankruptcy. That's very important. Now, do the resources of the enemy far exceed us? Oh yes, and they're collecting more of our properties every day. We still have many arms at our disposal. First, we do have our voice. If there's a talk show that you can find, get on it. If you're afraid, go to a payphone. But whenever you can, where there's an open call-in, where there's a talk show, declare your freedom and your strength. I am unashamed to announce that because of the treason and sedition implemented by the individuals that we face, that I wish to survive to see the end of this conflict so that I might be involved in the trials, so that knowingly these people will be tried for treason and sedition, for the crimes against our nation and humanity, and that when the time comes, either they will be deported, and those are lesser criminals, most of which I wouldn't deport if I could, and the rest shall be hung. For they have killed many. If they have their way, they will kill millions more. Now, that doesn't mean that what's going to happen to our end is going to be any party, because I have no illusion of this. I would trust that we will all get through this together, but realistically, this is going to be a long and arduous campaign. I will say this, that unlike 2 years ago, with what I know now, the numbers, as I said, are vast. You are by no means alone. And in fact, with what I have seen, I will say this again, I pity the fools. I really do. I pity the fools. For initially there will be great turmoil. Then the legions that we have in place, and many of them our own military, will realize what is at hand. It will be a terrible, long battle, not against our own military, but against a foreign oppressor. Because once the outside realizes that they can no longer use us, they will pull off the mask that they've been using for deception, and revealed will be a terrible beast, as I have described, a foreign entity. Not just European, not just African, not just Asian, but a hegemony of all of them combined. More and more has become apparent. The Butcher of Waco, very important to remember her. She's one of the keys, very expendable, by the way. Even as we speak, somebody is sitting behind her who obviously wields even greater power. That's the dangerous one. Some of them will not come right away, but once we see them and this mask is pulled aside, our true threat will be realized. That's the key. Now it gets around to another part here, and I know I've discussed so much, and again it's not nebulous, it is pertinent, because it's the foundation of where I come from. I do not speak wildly, I'm not wild-eyed. It's made a big decision for me to do what I've done already because it took a long time for me to come to this point. But I see this from my knowledge here, I feel it in my heart here. We are on the edge of calamity now. The enemy tastes, stinks, smells bad. We know it. We have seen it before. We may try to deny it, but there is no doubt in our mind that the stench is close. A piece that I used before, but I will remind you again, is very important here. Social democracy and the whole wheel, which is the best way that I've seen it depicted. Now, I won't hold it up. I'm sure it'll be on the tape. But I want you all to see this, because that's the best way to describe this when you read it. The people go from chains to spiritual faith, from spiritual faith to courage, from courage to liberty, from liberty to abundance, from abundance to selfishness, from selfishness to complacency, from complacency to apathy, from apathy to dependency, from dependency and degeneracy back again to bondage. Where in the clock are we? How much have we lost already that is irreplaceable? Well, I for one know that we've lost quite a bit, and I'm sure all of you do too. How can we change it? We stand and fight. As one of the old sayings that I use whenever we're together, a lot of people, there ain't no sense in running because you'll only die tired. So you might as well lock and load. Now, many ages have passed, People haven't changed. And throughout the nation, we see many variations and many themes that have been brought up and have subjugated our peoples in many ways, or have perverted laws, or have switched or changed the meaning of things. Our enemy is good for one thing, and especially with this regime that is in power right now. Their mission, and I want everybody to look at this, but their mission is to turn everything on its ear, everything on its head. If you were to take every document that we go by, our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence, our Bill of Rights, you would find many things that you would recognize, but inverted. The best example of this is to go to your Declaration of Independence. I challenge you tonight, or I challenge you now, that if you have it on the shelf, find it. If you don't have it on the shelf, obviously you are amiss, and you better correct that situation very quickly, because that's the only thin thread, that's the only part of this little rubber band right here that's holding together right now. That thin little area right there is the only difference between slavery and freedom for all of us. And I hate to tell you people, it's awfully close right now to stretching its final band. Boing, it's gone. We're only a breath away. But they have some very queer and strange ideas on the other side. And I think, and I recommend, that if you were to read the Declaration and go through the grievances laid down against the king, you would recognize every one of them right now. There are but a few checks left that they are going to use. But a few checks left. We're this close. The rubber band is stretched its limit. Now it's your choice as to whether or not we're going to bring that tensile strength back down and hopefully gird it up so that it can never separate again the way it has. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to be inspiring. I'm excited, and I hope that you are too, because opportunity only knocks once like this. You are going to build a nation. It's going to be one of the finest nations on this planet again. We are going to rise up, not go back, but rise up. We've already gone back, people. To go into or sink into socialism, communism, fascism, or just plain monarchism is to go way back and way down. We've reached a depth the likes of which we can almost do nothing but go up now, and that is our best bet. Reach for the stars now, but not in the way the enemy would like. Before we go any farther, I'd like to read a few things, and I'm wondering if it'll jump out at you and you recognize some of this. And I'll even use a reference at the end of every one of these. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing the assent of laws for establishing judiciary power. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. Recognize that? Socialism, boys and girls. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislature. And wait till you see what happens with the United Nations. He has effected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. The New World Order Army, the National Police Force, made up of the National Guard and other military forces. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving the assent to their acts of pretended legislation. The NAFTA Treaty is the best example of this. And again, our enemy turns the experience on its ear. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, the MJTF police, United Nations forces, or any other force that is brought in the future inside the continental United States in direct violation of the Constitution. For cutting off our trade with all parts of the world. And for all that we would say about free trade with NAFTA, let me ask you something. Will you be doing the trading? Yes. What they've done is ensured, and I will say this quite well, ensure that there's no competition when they go abroad. There is but one voice in the wilderness, and it certainly isn't ours. For imposing taxes on us without our consent. Anybody who raises their hand and says in this room that they were in favor of the last tax raise is either a fool or ignorant. And I will say this, I am sure that none of you were in favor of it. If polled, none of you were, I am sure we would find that there was not sufficient vote to even get a small percentage of the people to back this. For depriving us, in many cases, of benefits of trial by jury. Well, what are the forfeiture laws, which everybody seems to have forgotten? Confiscation of property without trial, that's British maritime law. What you're talking about there is guilty until proven innocent, abhorrent to the very body of the Constitution. For transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses. Well, how would that affect us? How about the United Nations Court? Your equal is going to be somebody in Bangladesh, Somalia, Malaysia, take your pick. We haven't made very many friends overseas, have we? So taking you overseas would be the equivalent to a death sentence, almost assuredly. For taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our government. And if that isn't today, I do not know what is. All of it sitting here. He has excited domestic insurrection among us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless street gangs, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. I hope you noticed the change I made. The merciless Indian savages, scratch, 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 the merciless street gangs, fabricated for the sole purpose of creating pressure from below, pressure from above. The Declaration of Independence, unanimous, 1775. Only the names have been changed to protect the guilty. It is true then, it is true today. Nothing has changed. In the United States, and I'll pass this around too, and it'll also be available to the people in the audience, we have what we like to call the Minute Woman. Hairdresser, an M1 rifle. That's my kind of lady. This particular person is reflective of the many millions who are out there who do possess arms. Male, female, young, old. Our liberty teeth. We have a second liberty teeth, though, by the way, and that is, of course, the trial. Once you're done with the trial, and I had to go through a lot of old books to find it, unfortunately, if you go back around the turn of the century, you'll find in your basic math tables, it explains that you can get about 4 politicians for every 120 foot of rope you can find. And this is still true today. That is the other liberty tooth. Now, make no mistake about it, I am sure that, as I said before, for anything that I've said, and especially with the government changing even as we speak to this day, most of what I have said this evening is going to be illegal, if it is not illegal already. But virtually everything that we do will be illegal. Everything that you own, your children, to manage them properly as you see fit, will be illegal. To possess cars, to possess property, to speak your mind, will all be illegal. And as Lindsey Williams has said when I was standing with him, what are you going to threaten me with, heaven? When you get to the point where everything I do is a crime, I can only go up. I don't have any fear for that reason. I have an obligation and responsibility because I do have children. But even if I were not, I have an obligation and a responsibility as a citizen. Now, since last we spoke, with that responsibility in mind, many activities have taken place across the United States. Fort Polk, Louisiana is now the North American Training Command for United Nations forces. It is under the control of United Nations Commandant in conjunction with U.S. military forces under United Nations Command. Two very interesting things. First of all, when Fort Polk first became active, inactive under U.S. auspices and was transferred to UN authority, 4 points were brought up as training points for this particular facility. D, item D, was the most important. taking what they had learned in Somalia to be used inside the United States for future operations. Now, I will remind you, what were we doing in Somalia? House-to-house search and seizure, confiscation of firearms, and remember, boys and girls, those people had machine guns. And they sent our boys in to go after them. Now, if they had no problems going in after machine guns in a grass hut, I don't think that the New World Order is too concerned in their mind about going after your .22s, your shotguns, and your personal arms inside the United States. What else did they do? Separation and categorization of men, women, and children to detention facilities, and the transfer thereof, and the running of detention facilities. Is this anything new? No. This is exactly what we've seen under the 3 guidelines we discussed in the past, though the names have altered somewhat. All of the original names are intact. The MJTF Police, Multi-Jurisdictional Task Force, whose original motto is, they are the velvet glove on the iron fist. By the way, the iron fist comment has been made by many people. The governor of Colorado, when discussing gun control in Colorado, stated that he would rule with an iron fist. Ronald Reagan in England talked about ruling and operating United Nations forces with a steel fist. Now, there's a thing about dogma I learned when I was an intelligence analyst. If you hear it once, that's interesting. You hear it twice, somebody's talking to somebody. But when you hear it time and again by people in a particular strata, it demonstrates that somebody's educating somebody in a particular way, and it's become a popular catchphrase, indicating dogma at the educational level. Well, it's obvious that these people are all coming from the same school. And the Iron Fist clan plans on coming in and walloping us. Now, I'll remind you of something I have said time and again. It makes no difference whether or not you have a velvet glove on the Iron Fist. When you get hit by it, it still requires stitches. And that's exactly what you're going to see here. Now, what else were they doing in Fort Polk? Well, most recently, which was very interesting and jumped out at some of our military compatriots, a small spoof article or blurb article was done approximately 4 days ago on CNN. And in this program, they showed United Nations forces being trained in how to deal with women, harassing them on the streets, or women and children and civilians getting in the way when these delightful United Nations forces come into your town and try to confiscate your property. And they're using or hiring people to be the victims, so to speak, of this United Nations occupation. Oh, I'm sorry, of this glorious peace effort. But in reality, it was very interesting. It hadn't jumped out to most people who were military, and if you see this tape again, I suggest you look. All of the civilians were wearing what we call the Miles system. Now, the Miles system was designed for simulated combat under conventional training conditions. A laser is mounted below the barrel of the rifle and bore-sighted to the weapon as if it were a regular combat arm. They then activate the laser by using conventional blanks. So in other words, if the blank is not there, the laser does not fire. So you cannot simulate fire. You must have the ammunition, so it's a realistic combat scenario. If you don't have ammo, you do not hit something. You cannot go bang bang. Well, I can understand that being used with combatants. But all of the civilians that were being displayed in this little blurb that was done, including the children, were wearing the Miles laser targeting system, as if there was an option to shoot the children and shoot the women and shoot the civilian adults, male, female, etc. Now, if that doesn't inkle you a little bit back here and get the old neck hair starting to raise, I don't know what will. I will remind you again about something very interesting about Somalia that seems to have been forgotten too. When we were going after that evil old warlord, who, by the way, has most of his family in North America, isn't that convenient? While we're going after him, we conditioned our helicopter crews to, of course, make sure that maximum effect was made with their 20mm cannon or their 30mm Gauss cannons. So when they had a target on the ground, I hate to tell you, those 30mm rounds have a tendency, unlike the A-Team television series, to go somewhere. So we raked down 300, 400, 500 Somali civilians. I don't think we enamored ourselves with them. Do you? No. It is not surprising, though, that they were able to get the pilots to do this. Why? Because we live in a video-conditioned society. And the weapon systems that they are using, once they're in play, look just like a video game. We've had 2, or almost 2, complete generations to condition to this. Killing is supplemental. It's an everyday thing. If you push the button, the targets disappear. And so, this was a conditioning test to see if the program worked, and it's worked quite well. For obviously those pilots have continued to do what they've been doing, which is to slaughter civilians at random and, of course, with great bliss. Unfortunately, that doesn't, or as I recall, was not the original mission of our forces there. And so then we have to ask ourselves, why did we start to get entangled in this way? Well, there's something else I want to add to this. The Rangers that were involved in Somalia were set up. A lot of people might start in their seat at this. A lot of other people would say, yep, I totally agree with it. And I will tell you why. First of all, it's a pretty, excuse the term, ladies and gentlemen, half-assed operation that was involved there if supposedly this gentleman with his cut-rate military force was able to befuddle our intelligence services. A force that during the Iraqi war, for instance, was able to tell you within a moment's notice when a fly rose up off the ass end of a camel, in which we use electronic warfare targeting against the American people on a regular basis to identify, for instance, marijuana growth. Tell you how many people are in your house on any given day. Monitor from 22,000 miles up virtually every thermal signature on the ground. And yet supposedly we couldn't find this character and, of course, his parties. Now I will say this, there were a lot of people to look for. But when you saw half-naked Rangers dragged through the streets of Mogadishu, the original ambition was to create a condition whereby the American people would jump up and scream, "Remember the Maine!" and run on down the road to that most recently fabricated war that they need right now. In this case, Somalia. It didn't work. They have letharged the population so well that you almost couldn't get these people up out of their chairs with a crowbar if need be. It worked. Their programming has worked too well. It worked so well that the American people sat on their dead butts and did nothing. Many were disgusted. I most assuredly was. Not with the Somalis, by the way. I may have even trained some of the people who were involved with the Rangers, but I will say this. What were the Rangers out there doing? Oh, well, in the process, they were out there confiscating firearms and going house to house. And strangely enough, the Somalis fought back. Now, I hate to tell you, you come to my neighborhood, you come to my home, you're going to get the same treatment, if not worse. Because in the eyes of the Somalis, they were patriots fighting for their home. They're dirt poor. There is nothing there that theoretically we as people would want, but obviously Mr. Rockefeller does want. And as one young major said standing there who was involved with the Rangers, he said, why don't we get this all over with and eliminate the middleman and bring Mr. Rockefeller's oil wells in here right now? The military knows, and they're disgusted of being used. So where can they turn next? Ah, yes, we have other options. Now, we've been talking for the last 2 months, 2.5 months about Korea. It's now getting some media coverage, and in fact, there are large troop movements taking place. It would be a beautiful symbolic gesture if the Korean situation could be allowed to escalate. It is 40 years since the last program took place, and it was the first United Nations military action, wasn't it? Especially where they were able to lord over the United States. Now, it's 40 years later, and you've heard this thing on C-SPAN about endgame program. Well, I'll tell you what. We have a convenient action here in Korea that works either way for the other side. Mr. Rockefeller has shifted all of his resources over to the Pacific Rim. Most, anyway. The last unconsolidated nation coming out of the Cold War is who? Korea. Icing on the cake. Another important thing is to geographically understand Korea as a pivotal point between the Asian Rim with regard to how it has been a conduit between Japan and China throughout the thousands of years it's existed. During the Ming Dynasty and during later dynasties, Korea was the pivot point, in some cases acquiring more strength than both China and Japan at the same time, and became a power of its own. Mr. Rockefeller and the CFR, the same people that are creating the situation in the United States, could care less which side wins. If North Korea wins tomorrow, it is just like the situation with Saddam Hussein, who is still in power and who we are buying oil from the way we bought oil in the past and we will buy oil from in the future. So if the North Koreans win tomorrow, we will be dealing with the North Koreans the day after tomorrow. What Mr. Rockefeller needs is a consolidated Korea. North or south, it makes no difference. He will still get the regime that he needs. Then the little dragons will be collected for their forte, their best operations against the United States, against the Middle East. Take your pick. They can be used in any way that they wish. But first, they must consolidate the peninsula. They're doing it quietly. The North Koreans, of course, aren't exactly happy. I have no great love for the North Koreans, no more than I have for the South Koreans. But I will say this, both sides are being played by the middle. And we are being played in the process, the American people. Again, who are we hiding all of this information from? The American people, because the enemy perceives us, the U.S., to be the greatest threat. As an awake, as opposed to sleeping giant, we are a terrible force. And we are awakening right now. As I've said before, I have seen this across the nation. As we realize that we're being used, regional government, for instance, right here, isn't going to succeed. They will make an attempt at it. It will take place. It is already in motion. The new States of America Constitution is going to be implemented one way or another, hook or crook, or something of comparable, shall we say, disaster. Because the new States of America Constitution states uncategorically, the overseer will decide your fate. The overseer will decide which rights you have and don't have. In fact, they aren't rights then, they're privileges, aren't they? Granted by some other alien creature here on the planet? I don't think so. Again, the formula works this way. Eventually, coercive force is our only choice. We have either that or slavery. It's important to understand here, for the time that we've been talking, that again, I must re-emphasize, I'm an optimist, not a pessimist. Yes, there are many bad things that are happening. I still think that this and the Bible is the key guidelines involved, part of a triumph that we have used for many years in this nation that everybody may have forgotten about: God, family, country. With that tripod, and it's very important that you remember that, the tripod being the strongest of structures that can be organized. And with all three legs intact, we are virtually indestructible. Take a look, though, in the last 30 years at the attempts that were made and the ingenuity of the enemy. God, well, I think we all know what kind of fight we've seen in this nation with regard to that subject. Family, let's talk about our children and what's at stake right now. Country, ladies and gentlemen, this is seeing an attack the likes of which it has never seen in its history. And if we do not stand for this Constitution, Bill of Rights, and Bill of Rights, we will lose a shining star that we can never replace. It is important to understand that even as we speak, and remember again, this is the 9th of December, that the Emperor Blythe, as I like to call him, you know, Bill Clinton, along with Hillary, the Tsarina, have proposed a national crime emergency this evening. Well, how far along it's gotten, even as I speak, we cannot be sure. But it is important to understand this. For instance, federal crime statistics from the Federal Bureau of Investigation stated that crime is down overall by about 4% in most categories, down from last year, and will probably progress downward because of the attitudes of many states, I might add Florida being the best, in which the citizenry are armed to the teeth and now are fighting back against the criminals. A criminal is a coward. His first choice is a soft target. He's not going to mess with anybody that he thinks may, shall we say, prevent him from collecting his pension. This is also true of tyrannies with government mercenary forces. They're only as brave as their paychecks, provided they can collect them the next day. If it looks like they're not going to, there isn't much profit in being a mercenary. Which comes back to an interesting piece that's right here, the New World Order Breaking New Ground, World Police. It's a little piece that we did. It shows a Pasgat armored group of black shirts, and that's a term you'll hear me use from now on, going through the front door of a house somewhere in the United States. Could be your house, probably be my house, and half a dozen others that we can think of very quickly. But the end result will be the same. A raping of our freedoms, a violation of our land. With Waco, the more that we're finding out about Texas, the more it makes sense as to and why they had to attack those people. It was pre-planned. It did have profit. There were profit motives involved. But the key here is that it was a symbol of both religion in the United States and freedom inside the United States on the part of people to gather together at their discretion for mutual protection again. I like to liken it to cowboys and Indians. The heathens were at the gate, and the settlers did fairly well to protect the fort. But even though they decided to defend themselves, they still did not in their heart believe that the enemy would kill them. And in the end they did. And so they failed. They failed their responsibilities and their moral obligations to resist against tyranny properly. At no time can we let down our guard. If this national crime emergency progresses, as I said before, and the crime bill is probably the best example, meetings and congregations of any type discussing subjects against the regime will be in direct violation. It will be a felony to do what I am doing right now, and who knows, it might be a felony right now, as I have said. I will continue to stand despite the threat. And personally, I feel that the enemy has already been given their Lexington. Concord is just around the corner. We've already seen the smoke from Lexington. That was Waco. The American people stood by and did nothing. We watched on primetime television as they burned a church and a home to the ground. They executed nigh under 100 people. They laid siege to that home for 51 days and effectively waged war against the American people with foreign forces. At least in 2 instances or 3, the London Times referred to foreign military forces, British SAS, as having been deployed in Texas. Now this is very important with regard to dates and symbolism. Our enemy, again, has a great deal to do with numerology and the symbolic effect of turning dates on their heads. It's interesting, the 19th of April, most people have noted that it was the Warsaw Rising that took place at that time, 40-some years earlier, 50 years earlier. But a more important date for America is the fact that on the 19th of April, the day that Waco was burned to the ground with the assistance of foreign military forces, the British, was the anniversary of Lexington and Concord, the shot heard around the world. And this time, no shot was heard by the American people. And the American people failed in their obligation and their responsibility to mutual defense against tyranny. Now, an interesting thing about this new Brady bill, which everybody has been talking about, which is more than the Brady bill, and in fact nobody has seen a complete issue of, nor will they for quite some time. There was a rush to sign this bill by the President. We anticipated that it be signed later than its original date, or the date that was finally brought to power, and I figured that no earlier than the 5th it could be signed. But a very interesting note. I will remind you of anniversary dates. Does anybody know what day the Brady bill takes effect? Probably not. The 28th of February of 1994. Now I will ask you something. What day were the Davidians attacked in Waco? The 28th of February, 1993. Everything is symbolic with regard to our enemy. And that they use a new date or an old date is irrelevant, and it is no accident. That is but one of many dates that will be crucial in 1994. We are on the edge of the storm. It is our storm. It is our fate. We will have to face this. Whether or not our metal is tested properly depends entirely on preparations. As I said before, if you're going to buy it now. If you're going to take care of a problem or a need or a shortage, take care of it now. For the enemy with this national crime emergency has a veritable arsenal of laws at his disposal that can be signed into executive order immediately. All of them sitting in the wings. Most of them we have not seen. Most of them we cannot imagine because at the discretion of the president, under a national emergency, his whim becomes law. While Nero played the fiddle, Rome burned. And we have a Nero in office right now. And there is no difference with regard to his, shall we say, looking down upon the peasantry, you know, the U.S. citizen. Another thing that's come to light that most everybody, I'm sure, in the Patriot Movement and across the country knows by now is that Mikhail Gorbachev is inside the United States. Tuvarish Robotny. He is, of course, coordinating U.S. military base closings. Is it not fascinating that a person who was, in fact, a butcher in his own time, working with the KGB, or the NSKVD before that, should now be coordinating and holding a political post inside the United States? Isn't that fascinating? And if that doesn't send a shiver down your spine, consider this. With the New World Order policy set up the way they are, and with our borders dropping, the same butchers who were involved in the extermination in this century of over 64 million people in 3 different purges will have the same authority in the United States as any other Interpol law enforcement agency. And they have been very efficient at mass extermination for many years. I will remind you of the CFR's recommendation that 75% of the American people should be done away with, along with most of the population of the globe. Do you honestly think, listening right now, that you're in the upper 25% to be kept? Or do you think that perhaps you're some of the sheeple and cannon fodder that will need to be dealt with on the part of the other side? Flip a coin. Now, because of this, the threat is real, the time is short, the stakes are high. But we have strength. Let me read this to you because this is a posting that we've already established, and there are many other militias. The Michigan Militia at large, Michigan Independent Militia Battalions, regiments and brigades, under sworn oath to protect and defend the Constitution of these United States of America and the Republic of Michigan, are calling to arms and to our colors individuals who wish to stand for the common defense of our liberty and freedom. Michigan IMBs are looking for individuals experienced with the following systems and attached to specific units. We train new personnel, 43 leg units to choose from. The 9th Light Mechanized, we need 1 M113 crew and support members, M114 crew and support members, and M41 light tank crew and support personnel. For the 17th Fast Attack, which is a regimental strength unit, M113 crew and support units, UH-1 C, D, and E crew and support personnel, OH-58 A, B, and C model crew and support personnel, and individuals in any Vulcan or Vulcan gun experience. For further information, contact the militias at large, Raider Company, HHC, P.O. Box 194, Dexter, Michigan, USA, 48130. God bless the Republic, death to the New World Order. We need militiamen, and we're accumulating organized forces on a vast and expansive scale. Many regiment, battalion, company, platoon strength formations are already organized throughout the states of Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. It is necessary for us to organize now. The best way to do that is at the lowest level, what we call a brick. The old parable of how you build things, remember in the Bible, on a foundation of sand or a foundation of stone. There will be many people who will seek us out, who will try to destroy us. The militia is a great fear of, has a great fear of, shall we say, being taken unknown. And so we must organize at the lowest level. We must be prepared at the lowest level to organize as a people. A brick can be a fire team of 5 men, 10 people, or even a platoon strength unit, but not much larger. Many people ask me, Mark, how can you trust the people you're going to bring together? Well, quite a few people here know how we've done this already. But it works like this. You're going to have to be able to look at your friends and your relatives and decide already, you may have done this, who it is you can trust and who it is you can't. There are many relatives you can't trust as far as you can throw them. And there are many people you've known for many years who might be under the same line. But you're going to have to be able to look into the eyes of the people that you can trust and decide whether or not you're willing to stake your life on them. And you will organize accordingly. 5 men, 10 men, whatever. And that's how a unit commander will then come to you, with the people that he trusts behind him and the people that you've organized behind you. And you will have to look in each other's eyes then and make the decision as to whether or not you can trust each other with your fate. But that's the only way that it's going to work. There's no magic bullet. There's no golden test. You're going to have to feel good in your heart. You're going to have to know in your mind that you don't have to turn around and look to see if these people are behind you. And as I said before, there are many relatives who will attempt to turn you in for this effort. There are many people that you will face, friend and foe. But I have found this. As I have said, there are hundreds upon thousands of organized formations already. This is what's needed. For when we faced our first Lexington and Concord, we had the same problem. When the British showed up at Lexington, a militia screen of very few men stood before a redcoat wave, and even though they knew they could not stop them, they created the shot heard round the world. They risked all. Some died. Many fled into the woods. But many other people saw the smoke from Lexington when it was burning. And the call had already gone out across the country, as we'll have to again. And when they got to Concord, and the British commander had them bring out the chair and lay it in the court, and he sat down and said, "Now, gentlemen, do your job." And the British soldiers went house to house to confiscate weapons and personal property for personal gain, just like the ATF, the FBI, and all these others will under the Directorate of Central Law Enforcement. The smokes rose from Concord, and the militia from all over, for miles around, converged upon that site, and the rest is history. For the best military force on the planet was driven back into Boston and laid siege to. And even with their attempt to break the siege, it was called Breed's Hill, not Bunker Hill, by the way. At Breed's Hill, they may have lost many people for lack of powder and shot, by the way, but they held the high ground. And at Bunker Hill, the British were not able to dislodge them, and they had to retreat, losing a humiliating number of people, and certainly facing another tactical defeat on the field that they could not accept. Boston eventually was liberated. The rest of the war was ahead of them. Again, no resources proper for a military, but they faced the threat anyway, and they won. Our militias are well organized now. They'll be better organized with every day that we have, and that is why I say again, if the enemy were to give me 2 more years with what I have seen already, it would simply be measured in fewer years or months spent in a war of attrition. And we will still win, but we would have less time to spend fighting and more time to spend building. Now, some people will say, well, this is a waste of time, it's all predicted, or it's inevitable that this is going to happen. That is wrong also. I challenge all of you who are good Christians to go to the back of the Bible, to the book of Revelation, and read the very last part of that text. If my people shall become a righteous people again, I shall heal their nation. Christians, citizens, fellow Americans, you have been asleep at the wheel. You are being given one last chance before the darkness. And I plan on making sure that I stand with my Creator accordingly. And I will bend my knee then. I know that. Another thing I will remind you about that too, that has always been an inspiration to me is, and it's on the cover of this, which I was most impressed with, and I'll make sure that we have another picture for posterity. But George Washington, before any action, and in fact every day, would spend 2 hours on his knees praying. For certainly, as God is my witness, it's probably all that he had. For there wasn't anything else available. There was never enough powder. There was never enough cannon. There were never enough troops. He faced what we call today a classic example of a strategic defense and a tactical offense. He was constantly running, and the only reason he could attack is to resupply, and it worked. But he got on his knees and he prayed, and his knees bent for that one being that is key to everything that we're doing. Now, this man was a general of the army and was the key to our military victory. A man who many people said before the war was mediocre, poor in business, and was not necessarily capable of leading people. When the time come, great heat for great steel. And the temper was tested and the man won. That's what we have to look forward to. Will our enemy be, shall we say, pervasive in many ways? Oh yes, even as we speak across Michigan we have had many sightings, some of them very reliable, with regard to foreign movements or movements of troops inside this state. I can only conclude that we are preparing for actions of some type, our enemy is, against the population. In what size formations? At least in 2 physical sightings between Jackson Road, or between the city of Jackson and Battle Creek, 2 formations, 20 vehicles and 30 vehicles each, 5-ton trucks, Humvees, etc., black with no markings. These vehicles were traced beyond Kalamazoo. Originally we suspected they were going to stop at Fort Custer military reservation. They did not. Another formation was identified 3 days ago on M66, headed northbound. They were in a rest and recreation break along the road. Cigarettes and drinks were obviously apparent. No markings on the vehicles. All of the individuals were in black uniforms. No markings or insignia were they wearing. There is a formation presently at a series of motels in the Detroit area that are taking up 2 complete motel complexes, Ramada Inn type. We will give additional data on that so that we might identify them. I recommend to anybody listening that, again, you be attentive. They aren't all going to be driving black vehicles, but they are still going to be moving in formations and in large numbers. And they're using the highways just as Hitler used his highways to move his military forces when the time came. I must remind you, by the way, that your interstates, especially those produced by the federal government, are not for your benefit. They were solely made for military application, and under federal law, with regard to transport, you are being allowed to use them for the time being. If and when the time comes, under a national crime emergency, for instance, it would be very easy for the iron fist to close and these roads no longer to be accessible to the general public. Can you imagine what type of traffic fun we would have then? Over the last several weeks, a series of events have taken place that are crucial to understanding the very nature of the forces that we face. As everybody will recall, NAFTA was initiated as an action to try and knock down the borders of the country. What was paralleling this action? Well, we had, of course, the National Crime Bill, which, of course, is the Omnibus Crime Initiative of 1993. What's in the bill? Good question. Most of us haven't seen, but we know some of the core elements of this particular law. In the first place, we have S8, which included a ban on the meetings of 2 or more people, either in private residence or in public places, that would allow for the confiscation of the properties and the automobiles of the people hosting any event, would allow for the confiscation of the cars of anybody leaving the event, and possibly the confiscation of properties. Were there other actions to take place that were added to the Omnibus Crime Bill? Approximately 2 Saturdays ago, and remember this is the 9th, just before the vote on the Omnibus Crime Package, the Friday before, Lieberman of Connecticut, standing in the House at approximately 2:35, I believe, in the afternoon, stated that, gentlemen, and this was incorporated in the crime bill, gentlemen, we are proposing a national response team to be deployed against the United States inside the United States. Now, this was part of an overall piece that was presented on the House floor. It is a part of the Omnibus Crime Package. We have not seen any of the particular writings concerning the action. However, the information came from reliable sources, both live and from individuals out of Connecticut who called us immediately upon seeing this. What would Mr. Lieberman mean by a reaction force? Well, if we get our United Nations friends together, and of course our military forces consolidated as a national police force, these action forces would be designed to go in and stomp on any resistance group or on any group of people who might say something derogatory about the regime. Were there other parts that were added to the crime bill? Yes. In addition to the existing omnibus package, at least 4 to 5 amendments, some of which no one has seen, which were passed effectively, for all practical purposes, into law. They have not been signed by the President. However, as we've seen with the tax bill, with NAFTA, and with the Brady bill, they are on the edge of completion. And nobody has stood in the way of these activities. Mr. Lieberman, of course, is key to what's been going on in Connecticut itself. Those of us in Michigan who know anything about the tax situation, which is crucial, we've just had, of course, our property tax taken away from us, thank goodness, in some ways. But if I were all of you taxpayers out there, I'd begin to shudder. In Connecticut, a similar situation took place 6 to 8 months ago. The property tax was taken away. A series of other taxes were agreed to by the taxpayer. And as of the beginning of this year, the property tax was put right back in place, and the state of Connecticut now pays the highest taxes in the Union. If that is a reflection of things to come, then obviously Connecticut was a key pattern state. The state of Michigan is going to experience something similar. This is very obvious. And by the time that we are finished, a series of actions will probably take place, which will first, of course, implement a number of local taxes, and then, of course, convert over our state property tax once again to a comparable millage level. Now, what will this do? Well, as I think we can all imagine, with all the taxes that are already being levied at the national end and with the taxes at the state end, it is not unrealistic to see a tax burden of 90% inside the United States. Dianne Feinstein, senator from California, by the way, stated 4 times on C-SPAN approximately 2 weeks ago that when we tax the people 90%, and of course everybody in the room that was watching with me fell off their chairs because she was saying this with a straight face, we really won't be taxing everybody 90%, we'll be taxing them 83% and 84% and this and that and the other. Then she said, but we will be taxing at a 90% level. She said it 4 times. And she said it with a straight face. Now this is no accident when you consider that it is again an excellent opportunity to turn on its head the traditions of the United States. I will jog your memory and allow you to recall that when we went to revolution for 10% taxes. It is the objective of the enemy to leave us with less than we originally went to war for. And it is certainly a slap in our face because most people are not paying attention. Now, what else do we have within the omnibus crime package? Well, there were a series of other actions which took place, including a consolidated tax against our ammunition. And for all of you hunters who are out there who said, well, they're not going to take my rifle, they're after your evil military firearm, I'll correct you on something. My evil military ammunition has a very low destructive quality. In fact, on the government scale that's been established, military ammunition would be at the lowest possible level. However, the evil 300 Winchester and .30-06 and .308 sporting calibers, incorporating hollow point, soft point, etc., would be of a highly destructive nature. And in fact, this is an excellent side swipe at the entire hunting arms that are out there so that they can be withdrawn if possible. In fact, approximately 2 years ago, Handgun Control Incorporated on Channel 7, Sarah Brady, stated that if we have our way, we'll get your ammunition and you won't have to worry about your rifles. Well, they grossly underestimated the intelligence of the American citizen, and as I said before, I would estimate that billions of rounds have passed out into the people's hands in less than 7 days. That is one of the other reasons that this national crime emergency may be proposed. They are going to try and stop what they did not believe would happen. The original purpose for the Brady bill and the crime bill passing was for all of you to cringe in your boots and beg, please take my gun but don't arrest me. In their smoke-filled rooms, they personally believe this. It has not worked, and in fact has failed. Now, the Brady bill already incorporates a tax on magazines. So if you have a weapon that requires magazines, I highly suggest, if you can find them, that you buy spares for virtually every weapon that you have. If you have a firearm, another thing that you should purchase are spare parts, and I highly recommend this be done immediately. Spare parts have not increased in cost, and in fact, most people aren't thinking of it yet. Firing pin, extractor, ejector, and all small springs for the weapon. If at all possible, 2 spare kits per weapon, preferably at least 1. Why? Because most of the weapons that you possess right now, if properly maintained, can be handed down to the next generation and the generation after that. Fine steel, good wood. I carry a weapon right now that was built in 1891. It's a Mauser type action. it will still kill you deader than a doornail, just the way it did in 1891 in 1993. I guarantee it. It'll put a hole in you just fine. And again, that's 100+ years old with smokeless powder. So we have good arms, we have good technology, we've got to take advantage of them. What else can we do? Well, other bills pending right now which are on the edge of completion. They're only this far away from being done. Number one, medical support items. When Hillary's national death sentence national ID card program comes into play, it is crucial that you have the medical supplies on hand that you need. I will remind you all that what's been happening recently with our medical supplies. Has anybody seen any of the articles concerning peroxide, alcohol, and other topical disinfectants which are being pulled from the shelf? This isn't being done because of some side problems that they're seeing. They foresee a resistance problem in the making, and they are trying to eliminate our medical support material that is publicly accessible. Another reason for this is that if you're going to create a national health care program, you have to make sure there is no private competition, which is exactly what they're doing now. The national ID card mechanism, the national health care package has one purpose and one purpose only, to document every citizen in the United States. As quickly as they possibly can, they are licensing you all. Oh, am I using that term license? Yes, I am, because this is licentiousness. It's in that Holy Bible thing again, in the Holy Bible, okay? It's critical to understand, because licensing is key to transferring power. It turns on its head a precedent that you are a sovereign and makes you subservient to the state. Now, what would a national medical package do in conjunction with all of these other programs that they have going? Well, we've got some gray-haired people in the audience here. They're living books, living histories. In Canada, we already have a national death sentence program there. It's just it can't be enforced as easily because when you're a Canadian, you could scoot across the border to the United States. Well, that's all going to be done pretty soon. And so all of a sudden, the Canadians, if you're 51 years old and you cannot get dialysis, you will not be able to get dialysis in the United States either, because all of our machinery will be controlled too. By the way, let me mention, that's probably the classic example. Many of the people here and many of the people who are probably listening will recall that when they were little, we used to collect gold medal stamps and a lot of other stamps so that we could buy a dialysis machine for your local hospital. Remember that? Yeah. Notice how we haven't done that for a while, or we're going to stop that completely with this national health care package, because they need to kill off the generation that's standing here right now. Despite what they try to say, this is a national death sentence package. Where will they go with the national ID card? Well, I'll tell you what, Mark's not taking the national ID card a la health package, and that's why somebody at work asked me, well, what are you going to do? I won't be going to work the next day because they'll make it a criteria. In order for me to work, I'll have to have the card. I'm gone. Of course, by that time, everything else I'm doing will be illegal anyway, so it won't make any difference, people. So what you have to consider is the card's mission is to consolidate and categorize as many as possible, as quickly as they possibly can. The next step is the chip. Now, there are many, many variations of information on this. Dr. Carl Sanders has an excellent tape that's available, and I highly recommend you people either listen to it, watch it, or if at all possible, read the literature available. He's one of the men who was instrumental in designing the chips, and his technology isn't complete because there's even newer technology now at hand. First, we have to have the card. By having the card, we then can have an opportunity for abuse. After all, Mark's not going to take the card. Half people here may not take the card, but there's somebody we can pay so that we can use their card, or we will fabricate one. And there are also doctors who will help us. So the doctors are going to have to become felons for assisting us without being part of the empire. And the rest of the mechanism is going to have to be set up so that we become criminals throughout the system. The only option that they will demonstrate is that you must have the chip, because the chip is personal. And after all, wouldn't you all rather have personal service than worry about losing this nasty old card? So the card will be there for only a little while, and then it will be moved very quickly into the chip system. We must refuse it at all costs. First of all, common sense, people. Your freedom is at stake. Now, the chip, combined with firearms control, combined with food control, all of these are interwoven. contrary to what we hear from a lot of people, and I'm not deriding anybody, it's not a single issue. There is no single issue involved here. They all interlock and come together. And it's crucial to understand this, because with the national police force that we are seeing and under this national crime emergency that's proposed, it would be a very short period of time before the forces that we've seen in Pennsylvania, the forces that we see at Fort Polk, the forces that we would see, for instance, out at Lejeune or in different parts of the country that are training now against us, that these people will come together with all of these criminal acts they can dispose against us, and no matter how you turn when they come through the door, they can find a reason to take you with them. Okay. Now, because of that, the consideration should be to look at which laws will preside over you first. We're seeing a lot of medical support items disappear, so I'd highly recommend that peroxide, alcohol, Listerine, all of these things be put on the shelf, and put on the shelf now, cheapest for the mostest. Should we also be putting other things away? Well, yes, if any of you can, as I've said before, medical support items are essential. Make sure that you put away those items for family members who might have heart conditions, special medication for instance, epileptics. And if at all possible, talk to your doctor and see about having additional drugs stashed away. Tell the doctor that you're going on vacation to Paraguay for a while possibly, and you're going to need a few extra bottles of this and that. Chances are the doctor will cooperate. Now, will this be illegal? Well, under the new Food and Drug Administration laws that are coming into effect, as I said, everything will be illegal. Right now, it looks like they will try to grab virtually anything and everything that has to do with home remedy or personal medicinal use that's on the market at this time. Vitamins, minerals, aloe vera, virtually everything that we deal with on a daily basis, and it's crucial to understand this. Have there been announcements concerning this? Yes, there have been. With many of the reports that we've had from different parts of the country overlap with respect to this. We've had black shirts, as I call them, remember, Pasgat armor, ski masks, busting into people's homes to confiscate vitamins. Now, virtually every agency or alphabet group that's out there has a SWAT team at this time. Now again, for those of you, since we're in Michigan, will recall in Dearborn we had the postal SWAT team show up. Somehow I picture mailmen with shorts, with black uniforms, but with shorts and with big mail bags and MAC-10s, right out of 3 Days of the Condor. About 10 of them. In reality, these are combat effect elements that have been developed, that have gone to, for instance, Ranger Training School. Many people that we're associated with report large numbers of non-military people going to Ranger School at this time. And they're not clandestine warfare people such as spooks and kooks, as we call them, CIA, etc. They're FBI, ATF, DEA, federal marshals, etc. being trained as conventional combat and military forces. We also have a number of other agencies that are involved in training at special facilities. Out west in Utah, where there were very quiet or dead military installations, they've come alive with black helicopter traffic, this on a daily basis. We have several reports that are reliable reports from first-hand individuals I've personally spoken with that have discussed specific troop movements, the use of trains. With most of the actions that are taking place, we're also able to confirm or at least confirm or deny the activities concerning detention camps. We've discussed the detention camps in the past. At this time, we believe, and we're trying to accumulate information, that a primary site similar to the type that was proposed by Linda Thompson in Indianapolis is presently being activated in Bay City, Oklahoma City, and Kansas City. These would be primary sorting facilities. Now, in addition, lesser camps are obviously activated. By the way, if you're paying attention to the National Crime Bill, you will note that 10 regional prisons have been established. Well, where are these? And under whose auspices and control are they authorized? Well, again, who gave the regional government all of this power, ladies and gentlemen? I thought we had 50 states to deal with. An overlapping and a usurpation of power again. Remember, we're going to befuddle people, or as they say with the Illuminati circles, out of chaos they shall bring order. Out of confusion we got the laws that we see today just within the last few weeks. How many people read the paper day after day and saw the close vote for NAFTA? And when we were done, 30 votes over. As we called Mr. Clinton, NAFTA clause. It was appropriate. That doesn't just mean that he paid them off. He probably bribed some, but he also blackmailed many others. And there's a veritable portfolio available for that. What can we expect in the future? Well, in the short run, under the crime bill, I think we can anticipate no later than the second or third week of February for a military action to take place. Why would I say this? The butcher of Waco, Janet Reno, approximately 2 weeks ago, in a public conference which took place the Wednesday before NAFTA was approved, stood with the ATF director on one side, the FBI director on the other, and 6 other quislings behind her, who we believe were probably the Directorate for Central Law Enforcement, the committee of all the individuals from the different agencies. And she stated that when the guns are outlawed, not if, that you would have 90 days to turn the weapons in. After 90 days, the weapons would be illegal, and they would come after you. Now, the only part of this particular statement that was actually covered on, from C-SPAN was the comment that she made, America's love affair with firearms has come to an end. And most people remember that headline, but do not recall the rest of the speech because it was not reprinted. Now, what does this entail? Well, she said 90 days. Rule number 1, you are dealing with tyrants. You're also dealing with the 20th century and 21st century socialists and communists. Because of that, I will jog your memory. Never in the history of these people have they stuck with an original timetable. In fact, you can almost half, if not third, that timetable to predict effectively when they will attack. Now, does that mean that they're going to stick to the 28th and 90 days after that? We're not sure. The crime bill could possibly come into effect the 2nd or 3rd of January. If we have this national crime emergency, all bets are off. Throw the dice on the table and see where they hit. Because if this is called in as a crisis, under Henry Kissinger's crisis management policy, then what we are seeing is a situation where all of your worst nightmares will come to pass in one convoluted ball. The Marines are training in California in urban warfare and have been going right into communities, flying over treetops and houses, coming up in sewers and people's backyards. And of course, it was even announced. They've been doing this in front of people. We have seen this all through the nation also. In Florida, we've had reports, etc. They are preparing for something. Now, we have no grand national catastrophe in the works. In fact, may I remind you also that 2 weeks ago, and in fact a week ago also, and perhaps this week they'll be meeting again, the street gangs in Chicago came to a national conference. Some form of contract was signed. We have not seen this contract. I will remind you that in the MJTF police guidelines, the National Police Force also, boot camps are being established to coordinate the training of these gangs, to bring them together, put them in one place, and utilize them. Now, if that is the case, and we have this national crime emergency, boys and girls, as I said, all bets are off, and they'll use the cannon fodder to the best of their ability. And that's the purpose behind the street gangs. Remember, the street gangs will be doing legally what they have been doing illegally for quite some time. Most important. Some of the tactical considerations that are affiliated with what we were just discussing have to do with how the enemy will use the existing road nets, how they're going to use our local police, how they're going to use our national police once they're formulated, how foreign forces will be incorporated inside the United States. One of the interesting pieces of information that came out of Indiana in the middle of this year had to do with the road signs. And in fact, at first, it didn't seem very pertinent, but we've already caught parties on the road marking some of the signs now. At least there have been 2 incidents recently. If you're driving down any of your interstates or any of your state highways, what I'd like you to do is look at oncoming traffic signs on the back of them. As you're driving down the road this way, look at the signs across the street. On the back, in many cases, you may notice markers about the size of this particular little packet, perhaps a little smaller. You'll note that they're in different colors and configurations, variations in size, but most common in Michigan, what we're seeing are triangles or rectangles. And rectangles the corner of these rectangles have been cut off. Well, that's rather strange, and at first it looked like some kind of vandalism, just as the people down in Indiana thought. As we got closer, we found that these were high-quality, sticky-back reflective markers that obviously were marking a route. Now, with a corner cut off, you can mark several different routes, depending upon how many times you want to use these individual markers. In Indiana, markers first showed up in the early part of spring, and then progressively through the year were identified. They were first showing up on secondary routes and roads. They started out with 3 basic colors, red, blue, and green, and were designed to obviously track from point A to point B. Now, they weren't just an oncoming signs. What's very interesting about it is that they were also above, overhead. When you came to an intersection, if these were vandals, they were very ambitious vandals because they had to do a 30-foot ladder and stay in the middle of an intersection and do about 10 or 12 signs. So as we started to look at this, things began to change. What was identified is a situation where these markers had other additional pieces of data attached to them. Eventually, numbers showed up. First, cookie cutter numbers that were very simple, one color reflective. Later, I think they realized that those were not appropriate and could not easily be seen, so square markers, again the size of this, with a number value in them, 0 to 12 or 13. Some higher, some lower, depending on where they were. At first, we didn't think they had a pattern. Strangely enough, from the other end of the game came another piece of information. Linda Thompson's people in Indianapolis, in conjunction with other individuals, identified a site which was an old Amtrak railhead rail maintenance facility. It was scheduled for closing in midsummer. The federal government came in with $10 million and erected a security fence around the entire site. Then additional or supplemental security fences inside that site. Then, of course, erected, for instance, windsocks. You know, those ultralight new trains they have are so difficult to keep on the tracks. We need the windsocks. Then they went to each of the buildings, which were anywhere from 300 to 400 yards in length and were large industrial facilities for bringing rail cars in and trucks in to maintain the rail cars, perform work on them, and then leave. Well, the buildings had all of their entrances sealed except for one pedestrian entrance at the very end of the building, which again, 300 to 400 yards long, and one truck entrance. New gas lines were hooked up over a period of weeks, and progressively this site has begun to look more and more like a very desirable detention processing facility, which is how we describe it now. The company involved is not properly registered, or the name of the company that's on the construction sign does not exist. The contractors involved didn't know who they were working for and didn't know what they were working on, but were brought in different waves. Turnstiles were installed for pedestrians, large numbers possibly, which were one-way, leading into the site and possibly could be reversed in some cases, but most were one-way, designed to take you into an area with no truck access, simply pedestrian access. Some of the little compounds inside were 2 to 3 acres in size, and all of the barbed wire to this particular complex, a real compound by the way, not like Waco, the fence angled inward to keep you from getting out. Now as this progressed over a period of weeks, a very interesting change took place. Signs were mounted on the fences around the railhead sides and inside these new compounds inside the main compound. Red zone, blue zone, and green zone. Inside is approximately 1.5 feet wide by 2 to 3 foot in height. Now that would not have seemed strange were it not for the fact that when you look on the interstates, the little signs had red, blue, and green primary colors. As we begin to watch these things expand, they went from Indiana into Michigan, and now many of your secondary roads and primary roads in the state of Michigan are now completely marked also. 33 North, M52 headed northbound from Jackson up to Stockbridge. Many other secondary roads, including 66, which was referred to earlier, also 32, 31, parts of 36, and other major highways throughout the state. In fact, we don't have proper intelligence resources to survey all of them, and they're popping up on a regular basis now in greater numbers. Other states are identifying similar experiences, and in fact, all of Ohio is marked. All of Indiana is marked. Now, a lot of people ask me, well, what would you do with something like this? Well, with our convenient facility in Indianapolis, which, by the way, next to it has a very large freezer facility with 2 more windsocks on the roof. It's an empty freezer facility. It was a freezer storage area for industrial foods. It's empty. Ah, but the freezers are running. That's very interesting. If you look at it with proper perspective, though, you have a very nice sorting facility. Heliborne support can land inside the compound. Railheads can be used to transport prisoners. And the way this site is set up, it's already color-coded. So let me apply a little bit of a theory here that would fit quite well. It is late January or February 1994 or 95, and Comrade Strzelenko, formerly of the 16th Guards Tank Army, is now with the 4th Occupational or Security United Nations Force in charge of collecting dissidents or undesirables inside what was the United States, now the new states of America. As he drives along with his 3 5-ton trucks, which are now filled, he gets on his radio and he declares that he is on red route, mile marker, which I'll explain in a minute, 14 north, land on my smoke, click, and he gets rid of his troops by his prisoners by dropping them off in the helicopters. They're taken to a detention facility. They never hit the ground. There is never a fear of those prisoners being recovered. It is a more efficient way to move the people without having to risk your people on the ground. Now, there are any number of other excuses that could be used, but this is ideal. Now, an interesting point. Also, something that started to show up in Indiana and is starting to show up in Michigan, signs about the size of this book right here have a mile marker on them. At the center of a community is a 0 marker in the middle of town. Progressively, 1 mile north, 1 mile south, 1 mile east, 1 mile west is another marker just like this. And they proceed out on these routes. What this does is give you a zeroing effect, a ground zero effect from a central collection point out, so that you can identify mile markers and specifically choke points. For instance, near every bridge is a special marker. And with this, we can identify where we are on the map. We can tell you which red route, blue route, green route. There are some yellow routes. And there are other routes that are identified by different configurations. But I can easily, with very little English, explain to you exactly where I am on the map geographically. And remember, this is for military application. The 2 units that were seen in the field marking these routes were military formations that were putting the stickers on the signs. In most cases, the signs have appeared almost overnight. It takes very little time to set them up. Are there similar sites throughout the United States? Yes. Could there be up to 10? Well, let me remind you of something. In our new Omnibus Crime Package, there are 10 regional prisons authorized for immediate use. I think it's pretty scary that our #1 growth industry in the United States is not industry, it is not agriculture, it is a prison complex. We're making the United States one vast penal colony. The next step is to do what happened in communist China. Once you collect enough prisoners, it becomes cost efficient to run factories with them. And since, as you will recall, the states and governors feel that we are nothing but chattel and property, all of this starts to come together and make more sense. You're either a slave one way or you're a slave the other, and both ways all the profit goes to not the state, but whatever industry is controlling that particular camp or that detention area. I can't say that they could be any more overt than for Mr. Lieberman to be on the House floor talking about the use of a reaction force inside the United States against the American people. You can't get any more overt or nor a declaration of war more obvious than that. And so with that in mind, this is a very realistic threat. I have seen many variations on this where people have claimed, well, they could never get away with that. 4 weeks ago, people told me they'd never pass the Brady Bill. They'll never get away with that. They'll never do that. They'll never pass NAFTA. Why, we won't let them. The American people won't let them. You're all the American people. So was the guy who was saying that. And what it reminds me of is something I've seen where everybody stands in a circle and does this, waiting for everybody else to do something. Well, congratulations. You're on our steps now. Tactical resources for this aggressor are actually quite restrictive because they've had to do much of their activity under cover of darkness. They've had to conceal a great portion of it, and because of loudmouths like us, they've had to change their tactics and practices. We have cost them much in resources. I am very proud of that. We have created great stumbling blocks, but we can only go so far with this, and the enemy perceives a threat now. They know that if they do not go for the gusto now, they will fail. I have said this, and I'll say it again. We know now where even some of the camps are. Given enough time and with better trained people and better resources, we can identify the threat more efficiently. But you can't depend on Mark, and you can't depend on a handful of other people to do it. It has to be the people as a whole. I've heard some very elitist stretchings from people here the last few days that there's us and there's those other peasants out there who aren't really trained. Well, who is the militia? The people as a whole. And so you're all going to have to be part of this. And we are going to have to pin them down. Unfortunately, our intelligence collection is going to outstrip our capability to use most of what we see. But we will get good intelligence when it is needed. The enemy perceives us to be the threat. Now, at the strategic level, what can we anticipate? Well, it has already been mentioned that American forces, of course, might be deployed in Korea. This serves another purpose. If we're at war and we all of a sudden have a whoopsie, a national crime emergency, why, what better way to keep everybody confused and in chaos? As Shakespeare said, busy giddy minds with foreign affairs, and you can do anything you wish at home. What could be more prophetic than that right now? They've tried very hard. Now, strategically, their military forces, eventually, as we know, we have seen Belgian, Dutch, Russian, German, French, and a veritable plethora of foreign forces inside the United States, most of them still here. They haven't gone anyplace. They're being used by this regime now. They will have no compunction about shooting American citizens. Make no mistake about that. There should be no doubt in your mind. And especially with this national emergency, again, I will remind you what is the basic uniform of our enemy. The black Pasgat helmet, the black ski mask, a black uniform now with no insignias, with no patches, with no identification. Well, I'll remind you of something about that. With what we were taught back in the 70s, we used to call those people terrorists. And that's exactly what they are now, terrorists. Again, there is no difference between the Nazi at 11 at night with fog behind him in a leather coat and a black hat, and this son of a bugger showing up at your door at 2 in the afternoon with his black ski mask and his black coal scuttle helmet, kicking in your door and violating your property. The terror factor is the same. And by the way, as I will make you remember again, we all talk about the Nazis, but we ate their lunch. The communists, the KGB, their dress uniform for the last 70 years has been what? The black uniform, which symbolized terror, darkness, evil. The key. I think that a lot of older people I've had no problem turning around for this reason. It is interesting to note that a lot of people that I've known for many years, only recently, within the last few weeks or a few months, have come about. Why is this so? Because they have had practical experience at this. They have seen this before. They do not want to live to see this again under the same circumstances. People that we've known from overseas, as they've said, we have no place to run, nowhere to go, nowhere to hide, so we might as well stand and fight. We have nothing to lose. In the last, there's always that fateful call to arms, which I consider to be the key and most important. At a time, many people would like to see much more in the way of detail. At this point in time, I'll offer everything that I can, and as most people know, we don't really hide anything from anybody. In fact, if nothing, I'll talk your ear off. But we have come to such a point in time when debate is irrelevant, when argument is moot, and when there is but one choice: to stand for liberty and freedom, or perish, and perish in a terrible way. I've seen many revolutions so far in the events, and many turns and changes. And I might remind you of something too, because it's important with Mark especially. You've never heard me say revolution, even here tonight. And I will again remind you of why. To revolt or to create a revolution in this particular situation is unnecessary. We have the documents at hand. We have the right, we have the moral obligation and responsibility to protect and defend this Constitution and Bill of Rights. To revolt or to create a revolution would dictate that we would throw this document down. There is nothing wrong with the document. There is nothing wrong with the writings. They are still sound as they were sound 200 plus years ago. The key is this. The regime that is usurping the power that it has is the evil. We know it, you know it, they know it. So we have but one choice at this time. Many cry peace, peace, but there is no peace. The war has actually begun. Why stand we here idle? Is life so dear or peace so sweet as to be purchased at the price of chains and slavery? Forbid it, Almighty God, I know not what course others may take, but as for me, give me liberty or give me death. The words of a man long dead ring true today. They are the core of what became a revolutionary movement. They must be the stinging sword, which is two-edged, of this movement now to protect and defend that which they paid for with blood and cold steel. I will recall that there are but three cries that I use, and I always end every comment that I make with them like this, no matter how long it takes. God bless the Republic, death to the New World Order, we shall prevail. Good night.